If you have been thinking or saying, I want to do a podcast, but then immediately you think, I'm not techie. I hate my voice. Who would listen? What would I say? If you are a woman over 40, you have things to say. And with my course, the Podpreneur Blueprint, you can get a podcast up and running within a week if you'd like. If you're not techie, don't worry. I give you options of how to find someone that can help you. We are not islands. We don't do this alone. If not now, when? Because on New Year's, when you make that new resolution, this year, I'm going to think about this. You could be saying, this year I did, and I have 52 episodes. You can do this. Learn all about podcasting with the Podpreneur Blueprint System. Go to www.coachlori.com and get your flash sale today. Somebody's praying for an answer, and you have it. Will you say yes? Go to www.coachlori.com. That's L-A-U-R-I-E.
Love of people and my heart beats for meaningful conversation. I'm not good at small talk. I'm really not good at it. It's in big group settings. I'm almost like, I don't even know how to act right now because all I want to do is just like go deep with like one person.
Has your life, your dreams been interrupted? Good news. It is possible to reinvent our lives. People are doing it every day, and some are brave enough to share the struggles, disappointments, and challenges. If you are looking for a new beginning, a do-over, or to rediscover your passion, maybe even find a new one, then grab a cup of coffee and let's talk. Interrupted, Act 2, Reinventing Your Legacy, with your host, Coach Lori.
Alicia Wolfe is the host of the Boldly You podcast and Integrate Well. Welcome.
Thank you, Lori. Thanks for having me.
I love listening to your podcast because you do something I do and not very many people do it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Tell me, what is it?
It's the tease.
Aha, at the beginning of the podcast.
Yes, I work in radio and tease is a big thing. In fact, we want to say coming up or give a little hint to keep people listening. I always put just a snippet of part of the interview at the beginning so that people will be like, wait, what is this? And you
leave them
do that.
wanting more.
Yes, I love that. What made you think to do that?
I've had a dream of having a podcast for 2 years now, and I've had limiting voices in my head that held me back from taking action on that and actually fulfilling on that. And I know where they're coming. I know where the voices come from and those limiting beliefs come from. And this podcast was really a bold act of my own healing and working through those. So in preparation for finally or perfectly timed launching of my podcast, I enrolled myself into Jenna Kutcher's The Podcast Lab.
Well, I love Jenna, but I didn't know about her podcast lab.
Yeah. So I thought I would just get a master class in all things start to finish podcast. And that was one of the tips that she recommended was the teaser, as you call it, that little clip at the front that really just hooks people into it. And it's also great for me because I go back and edit all my podcast episodes and I just listen in my body for the ones that make me like lean in and feel excited. And then I just say, that's the one. I'm glad it worked for you.
I love it. And then what I do is I take that and I create a reel.
Correct. Yeah.
And then I use that to promote something else you do, which I have to listen. I don't have to. I listen to a ton of podcasts. I'm on a ton of Zoom trainings and I have this pet peeve and it's you guys, if people could just stop saying that and you don't. When I was listening, it's very honoring. When I was listening, you said in your beginning, you say something about you. You say welcome. And whenever you say you just say you. And
thank you. Thank you for noticing that and for acknowledging that. I really appreciate that. I'm sure you know this because of your career in radio and broadcasting in different forms. There's nothing quite like listening to hours and hours of yourself talking to really clue into where your opportunities are from a public speaking point of view. And word diets are really important. That's what I call word diets, is really being clear on the words you want to intentionally eliminate from your diet or from your vocabulary and making it an active practice to do so. You guys is a big one, and we hear it all over social media and in different places. And it's not very inclusive language for me, as much as it can feel casual and nice to be like, hey, you guys, it's not inclusive language. And so for me, I wanted to be really intentional about editing that for myself.
I love that. And I always say, I guarantee you, if you talk to one person, like you're having coffee with them, you will never say, you guys. I'm never going to be like on with you and go, hey, you guys, Alicia. Like, yeah. But what I found, because when I teach this, I've had some thought leaders, some podcasters that have really struggled because they feel like if they don't say everyone, they're excluding people. And so it is a mind shift. And I love it that you have gotten there, because I lean in to your podcast. I'm like, I love these women you're podcasting. I want to meet them.
Thank you. Oh, that makes my heart so happy to hear that that's how it resonates. It's exactly what I want people to take away from it, is this. The people that I have on my podcast, women, and I've got some episodes with men coming up, I think they're the most interesting and fascinating people in the world. And I just want more people to hear their stories and be inspired by their stories in the same ways that I have been. And so I'm glad that that's resonating for you too. And on that note that you mentioned about people not wanting to exclude in using their language, and they want to talk to everybody. If you talk to any copywriting expertise or any branding agency or anything, they will tell you, you cannot talk to everybody. You can't. You can talk to your niche. In my case, like sort of an avatar or a dream client or dream customer. That's always who I'm talking to. And if it doesn't work for other people and they don't resonate, that's okay. I'm not trying to resonate for everybody. But usually what happens is when you're super clear on who you're speaking to, other people are, even if they fall outside of that avatar, they're still leaning in.
So in radio, we call it demographics, but it is something what they teach you. And this is so funny because many of the marketers that have a podcast, they will teach you, you will hear them say, if you talk to everybody, you talk to nobody. But when they get on the mic or the YouTube, they forget and they go right to it. And I've actually reached out to a few podcasters that have millions of views. And I've said, I wonder if it would matter to you if you knew that 40% of your audience, because I come from trauma, I've kind of equated that when people say, you guys, some people, maybe that doesn't affect them, but people with trauma, even no matter how much we work, we struggle with that and we feel like we don't matter. And so when somebody says, you guys, the way I am viewing it is they've just stepped up on stage and they've removed themselves from equal to me.
Interesting. Yeah, there becomes a hierarchy or an authoritative positioning.
Mm-hmm. What I found, and maybe my wording, I've tried to use ChatGPT because I'm so passionate about this. Crickets. I thought, you know what? The best I can do is when I teach podcasting is teach this so we have better podcasts. And those will be the ones people will listen to or at least pay attention to.
Yes. Well, thank you for doing that work and for continuing to spread that message, whether it be through feedback or through your own teaching or this conversation.
Thank you. You said you were really afraid. You took a class. What pushed you over? What gave you the courage to push record to make it happen?
The desire to make an impact and to share my story as well as other people's stories, knowing that it would inspire others, got stronger than my fear or my limiting belief or voices that I had in my head. This idea of someone listening on the receiving end of a conversation that I'm having and feeling inspired enough to take action on something that they've maybe held back on for many years or were afraid to do, that vision of that happening was stronger than this voice I had in my head, which I knew intellectually wasn't true, but the heart feels what the heart feels. It just became strong enough that I said, okay, it's worth it. Like it's worth that fear. It's worth leaning into that fear, taking courageous action to do it. It's been what I hear. I get feedback from people who have said exactly what my vision was. Like, you've inspired me to do this, or I felt lit up by this, or this was that mic drop moment for me from one of your guests or from you. So I've heard that. And in that same process is like that voice in my head is getting quieter and quieter. It's still there. It's definitely still there, but it's getting quieter and quieter. It's really serving so many purposes of my own self-healing and self-work, inspiring others, which I feel we all have a responsibility to do when we are on the other side of a tough decision or a leap or a bold act. When we're on the other side of that, it's our responsibility to share that with other people so that they can then be inspired to do the same, whatever their version of it is.
I love that. I always tell my students, toward the end, they get to this place where they're overthinking and they go, well, who's going to listen? Or what if no one listens? I go, that's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is you're here because you're nudged to tell a story, and that's your responsibility.
That's right. And a dear friend of mine, Luca Petrucci, who has a podcast called Free to Be, he gave me the advice that said, and he told me, have the conversations that you want to have. Have the conversations you want to have, and don't be concerned with statistics and data and how many listeners or the outcome. Don't be attached to the outcome. Just simply have the conversations you want to have, and you'll get the fulfillment that you need. And he's totally right.
How long have you been podcasting now?
Only for like 2 months.
Awesome. So this might be a big question, but what doors have opened up, because you're a coach? So what doors have opened up in you sharing these stories and having a podcast?
Well, I've gotten some business out of it, so that's great. Anybody who's a coach sort of knows that there's, or any type of role like this, knows that there's a lot of rapport building and trust that goes into converting someone into a client. So they need to know who they're going to invest their time and energy and their heart and their vulnerabilities and everything into. I've had an audience, I'm using air quotes, for a couple of years now while I've been in my coaching business. What the podcast has done has created a portal for us to get closer, for them to feel closer to me, to know more about me and what I'm about and what I stand for and how I talk. And so I've had some people who I've known in my orbit say, I want to work with you now because I know what you're about and I trust you and I like your style. And so I've converted people who were, I don't know, there's probably a term for it, but passive followers into active clients and people who want to do the work with me, who are probably thinking I need or I'm craving a coach of some capacity, but this just was another way to build rapport and authority. Again, I don't love the word, but authority in the space of coaching.
We always hear know, like, and trust.
Know, like, and trust. Exactly. Yeah.
Being a coach, this is something I came up against and I resisted for a long time, was the interviewing, because I thought, well, if I'm the coach, I want to bring the business to me. So I want them to hear me. But in sharing stories of overcomers, what almost all of them say is, I couldn't do it alone. I hired a coach. I got a counselor. I think that is what I want to represent. And I always say, number one, a good coach is well coached. If I want to hire a coach that doesn't have a coach, I don't hire that coach.
Yeah. Coaches need coaches.
That's right. And number two is just the power of asking for help, reaching out. I think that's because your podcast seems a lot like mine in a way. You're highlighting people who have overcome. And so what would you say about that? Was that a struggle from, I want to talk about coaching things, to I want to highlight people who have overcome?
I'm still figuring it out. When I originally envisioned the podcast, was it going to be conversational or was it going to be like monologue style? As it stands now, it's strictly conversational. And I think there will be a time that comes where I start sprinkling in some monologue things, because not everybody has time to listen to a 50-minute conversation, right? Some people want a quick hit. What can I do? What can I apply? And I'm the queen of practicality, as my coach and teacher says. Like, I take things that are sort of conceptual and cerebral up here and just like make them very practical for myself and for clients. But what I find in the conversation is that it's a story. It's highlighting the struggles, the actions that were taken, and then the celebrations, right, on the other side of it. But always what comes from it is something that's practical. Maybe you've experienced this too, is there's always something I'll say to the person who I'm interviewing or talking to. What's a practical tip that we can give to our listeners? Like, what did you do that worked really well for you that our listeners could take away, something that they could apply to their lives? Because that's a promise I've made to my community and my podcast community is you will leave every episode with a practical tip and technique or tool that you can apply to your life. So I have to make sure that there is a version of that. And some of them are very blatant and obvious like that, and some are more subtle. But because it's so important to me for people to feel like they're really getting something out of the time, the 40 to 50 minutes a week that they're spending with me, which is time is such a sacred gift. I want them to feel like, dang, I got something out of that and I can use that.
I love that. So this brings a question to me about podcasting is what made you choose your podcast to be 45 minutes?
I don't know. I just use my intuition. Like my inner hearing just said between 40 and 50 minutes. And I'm not sure if that's correct. Well, usually when I'm recording, it ends up being over an hour. When I'm doing the editing, I'm taking out the pauses, or I always give my guests the option to do like a take two if they want to like rephrase a response or something. Always permission to do that. So I edit it down to between 40 and 50 minutes. That just feels correct right now. And it might not later. It might want to be much shorter, or maybe the monologue episodes that are more sort of like quick hits will be 20 minutes. I don't know. I'm just using my intuition to guide what feels correct for me right now. And in a conversational setting, that sort of 40 to 50 minute mark feels correct. Any shorter than that, I don't know. My guests just have so many great things to share.
There's really not a lot of rules right now. It really is your intuition and what works for you. And for me with radio, people will always say, I could work in radio. I love to talk. And I'm like, if you love to talk, your boss is going to be knocking down your door saying, tighten it up.
Yeah. They're listening to the radio when they're commuting or they're going to the grocery store or something, right? So they maybe only have 5, 10, 15 minutes in the car.
Right. Or if it's music radio, you have a song intro that has fluctuated over the years. Used to be talk over the intro right up to they call it the post, right up to where they start singing. Then there was an era where you don't ever talk over the intro. You just play music under you and then you play the whole intro of the song. And now it's back to talk over the intro. So I might have this promo that I have to say about doing this pet supply drive. And I've got 10 seconds and I've got to figure out how to say all of the sponsors, when the drive is, and how to get information in 10 seconds.
That's an art form. I couldn't do it.
So I think that's really interesting. Also, something I wanted to highlight that I see you doing that I love, because I listen to a lot of podcasts, it seems like there's kind of this trend on some I listen to where the podcaster will have a guest on, but the podcast is still all about the host. Like they almost use the guest to highlight themselves, even if like the guest is famous. And maybe it's my old radio, maybe it's my interview thing, but I always have believed as an interviewer and a host, our job, and I'm not saying I'm right, this was just where I came from, was to highlight the guest. And you do that beautifully. You are able to insert coaching, but the focus is on the guest. And that really is a gift. You do that very well. Was that something you had to learn? Was it a coaching skill?
Well, my natural intuition is to not talk about myself, in fact, and that comes from that inner voice that limiting voice that I have, that nobody wants to hear what I have to say. So it's a little bit.
I rebuke that.
Thank you. I'm learning that as well. And I think because as a coach, really my role as a coach is to ask questions to help my clients get to their own realizations and transformations. One thing we're taught as coaches, at least through my certification, is to not be like the advice monster and jump to the conclusion. When a client comes to me with I'm curious about this and I don't know, like even though in my head I'm like, I've been there, because most of my clients are me like 10 or 5 years ago. So I'm like, I know what to do and I want to give you this advice. My job isn't to do that, because that's not going to be transformational for them, right? The transformation comes when they can uncover it for themselves, I guess, subconsciously, or just because it's sort of how I've been leading my life and my speaking for the last several years, is to continue to put the framework back onto the guest. I'm just presencing this now that you're asking me. I think a lot of my listeners right now are coming from my guests community because I'm brand new, right? I only have 10 episodes that are live. I think I've got like 20 recorded, but 10 are live. So I'm still brand new. I don't have this huge following. When I think about who's going to be listening to the episode, they want to hear my guest story because that's where they've come from. My job is to just continue to pull out and ask those questions that help my guests share more about them and their experience.
I love that you are so curious. And I remember one of my classes I was teaching, there was this woman, she was in recovery from drugs and alcohol, and she was really getting her life together. And I had said, people aren't really curious. That's what I found. For instance, a friend of mine was going to go to a meetup and she goes, do I tell them I work in radio? Because then they might stalk me. I go, no one will probably ask you. People aren't curious. I've used that example because she came back the next day. She goes, nobody even asked me. And she was on a real prominent radio station here in Seattle. So my friend said, now that you said that, I noticed people aren't curious. And so I feel like my gift is curiosity. And there's a lot of reasons. People feel like, oh, well, if I ask too many questions, I'm being invasive. But we live in a world right now where people don't feel seen and heard. And to be curious, I believe, is such a huge gift. And I love it that that is one of your core values.
Thank you. Yeah, it really is a core value, both personally as well as within my brand. What I hope people take away from any interaction they have with me, whether it's as a client, as a friend, as a listener, anything. So yeah, thank you for noticing that. And I believe you're right. And for those people who say like, I think I'm going to be too nosy or I'm overstepping, I mean, I don't know. I guess it requires some self-awareness and some social awareness to know what's appropriate to ask and what isn't. But no, people want to share their story. They want to be asked. They want to be asked their opinion and their experience in something. And I have an innate love of people and my heart beats for meaningful conversation. I'm not good at small talk. I'm really, really not good at it. It's in big group settings. I'm almost like, I don't even know how to act right now because all I want to do is just like go deep with like one person. And I find that for the most part, people are really receptive to that and they really like it. And I know when they're not. And I can say, okay, that they want to keep it sort of like not shallow, but they want to keep the conversation narrow. And that's great.
Yeah. You can take the cues.
Totally. Yeah. And if you can't, well, I don't know.
And that's what I love about coaching. I'm so passionate about coaching. And I tell everyone, get a coach, because if you get a good coach, you will feel seen and heard. And I say I always say, use the I language, but I am saying if you have a good coach, you will feel this. If you don't feel this from a coach, you don't have a good coach.
Right.
You have an advice giver. And often people are actually consultants and they call themselves coaches. A true coach is going to be curious. They're going to give you the room to speak and to put out there what it is you need and what you're looking for. Would you add to that, or what would you say?
Yes, I would definitely. I completely agree with you. And it's interesting. I just sent in a proposal to an organization based in Los Angeles to do some coaching with them. So not consulting. They specifically wanted performance coaches for their employees and for their leadership team. And because, I think they also understand the value of that. And when I visualize myself working with this company, it's really just an extension of what I do with individuals, which is asking questions and being curious, sharing advice when it's appropriate, and sometimes it is. And sometimes I'll have clients directly ask me, well, what should I do? Or what would you do? And when they say, what would you do? That's an open invitation for me to say, well, if I were in this situation, this is what I would do. Or I will say, if I may make an offering, then they're ready to receive it. Then they say, yes, I'm open to receiving it. And I can give a little bit of advice and from my own point of view or from my own experience. But again, it's much more impactful when people can come to those realizations on their own. There's this exercise, and I think it's by, I can't remember who Dean Grazio, I can't remember who exactly it is, but it's called the 7 Levels of Why. Do you know it?
Yeah, I've heard it from many different mentors. The 7 levels, they may say, of why, but it is powerful.
It's really powerful. And I actually just did it in school, like a school leadership team that I've done some consulting work with. It really asks the question. So the exercise itself says, okay, so in this case, it was, why is education important? And then the person answers, oh, well, because it's important to succeed in life. And then you go, well, why do you think it's important to succeed in life? Well, because it sets you up for an impactful future. Why do you think an impactful future is important? And it requires you to go 7 levels deeper. And I just got chills. So I know that that's like a good sign. because it really lets people get to the depths of what's important to them in any given situation. That's something that I would offer your listeners as they're doing some exploration work on their legacy and what's important to them and what they want to be doing, is just take those 7 levels deep and continue to ask yourself those questions.
You bring a good point, because as a coach, asking for help and having even a friend be diligent enough to just keep asking the question. And it's funny, in my coaching classes, people will say, well, I need to write the question. I go, you can't really write the question. You have to listen well and ask the next best question for what they say. Right. Which you demonstrated so beautifully. So one more thing, I could talk to you all day. I heard you say, and I love, because one of the things, men probably do it, but women's self-talk is terrible. When I was running a day center for homeless women, the homeless women would say to the volunteers, oh, I love your necklace. And then the volunteer would feel bad because this woman's homeless. And they would like almost reject. Then that person felt bad. And I would tap them. I'd say thank you. Just say thank you. Or I received that. And I heard you say, I received that. That is such a powerful gift. When we take the time to give a compliment and somebody rejects us, for me, then I'm less likely to do it again, because we can only take so many rejections in a day. And what a gift to say, I received that.
Yeah, good. It's a gift to give a compliment. It's a gift to know that was received and accepted. To exactly your point, like it can feel really lame if you say, oh my God, like, I really love what you did with this place. Someone's like, oh, no. Like, and you're like, oh, okay, never mind. I shouldn't have done it. For us, it's important to give the gift back of receiving the appreciation or the recognition or the gratitude. Like, you don't have to always be so humble, especially as women. Like, why are we told to be so humble all the time and not receive things? Like, be proud of whatever it was. Be proud of that necklace that you're wearing. Tell the story of where you got it. And I think when it comes to leadership and women in leadership, which is a lot of people that I work with are female leaders, one of the things that they will do, we all do as women, is we point to external things as to why we got to where we are, or our accomplishments. You did so great with that presentation, or, oh yeah, well, I just got really lucky. The audience was really great. Or I don't know. There's so many different examples. Yeah, you're right. I really didn't own or claim that achievement, which we as women especially need to do if we want to break the glass ceiling and get to the places that we know that we need to have more women in leadership and executive positions. That's the other thing I would say, is receive recognition and compliments because it's a gift, and don't be afraid and too humble to claim your achievements.
Alicia, it has been so great. There are so many more things I want to talk to you about. So maybe we'll do this again.
I'd love to.
Number one,
maybe I'll have you on my podcast.
There we go. I love that you edit, because I hear a lot of influencers saying, don't bother editing. You want it to sound natural, but I love my listeners too much to leave in a bunch of garbage. And it sounds like you do that too. But I want to take these last few minutes for you to tell us all about where we can find your podcast, and tell us about your webpage, what you want us to know.
Thank you. Yeah, I think a great entry point would be to look up the Boldly You podcast with Alicia Wolfe on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It's a great place for you to learn a little bit about me and what I'm all about and what I stand for, and also to hear really beautiful and inspiring stories from people who have really chosen to redefine success, go against the grain, and relentlessly pursue their bold dreams. No doubt you'll take away some inspiration. Boldly You podcast with Alicia Wolfe. Integratewell.co is my website. And then find me on Instagram at Alicia Wolfe, ALICIAWOLFE.
With the E on the end. And also it is .co, not .com. That
Correct.
Took us a minute to connect because I kept assuming it must be .com.
Yes, integratewell.co. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate you. Appreciate the invitation.
If you love this podcast, here's a big ask. Will you share with your friends and family, subscribe, give us a review, and a 5-star rating so that others looking to reinvent their lives will be able to get the help they're looking for? Thank you in advance.